Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 307 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin, Night at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by some wonderful guests tonight. First of all, we have crossing over once again from Tuesday Takes, Tre'Shon Diaz. He's at Tre'Shon on the Twitters. Tre'Shon, welcome back. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Excited to talk about, second Saints game coming up, and happy to have Joe here as well with me, so that we got a real professional in the house tonight.
Yes, we also have with us, of course, Joe Patrick. He's at JA Patrick 200 on the Twitters. Joe, welcome back to the show. How are you doing on this Wednesday evening?
I'm not too professional. But no, I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me back on. It's always fun to talk, and it's especially fun to talk when the Falcons are doing really well. It's like it feels weird. It feels a little odd that it's just like, a ho-hum win against the Cowboys, like, no big deal. Raheem walked into the press conference after the game and was like, guys, we just won. It's too quiet in here. Why is everybody just sitting here in silence? It's like, well, we're kind of getting used to it. Like, you guys just kind of doing this. So
yeah, I feel like we still there's still a decent chunk of me that doesn't really believe it somehow. It's like, I don't know what I'm watching. I'm not sure what's happening here. I don't know what to do with my hands because it's been so long since this team has been here. I mean, it's been since another election year in 2016 that this team has been 6-3, which is kind of funny. Right. So it's been a long time since we've been to this spot. But yeah, I mean, obviously this week, a big week for the NFL with the trade deadline. Falcons actually don't end up making any moves. I know we'll talk about that. I know that's quite controversial, so we'll talk about some of the reasons why they didn't decide to make moves and if we think they should have or shouldn't have. I'm sure that'll be a riveting discussion. Of course, talk about Hate Week Volume 2, chance for the Falcons to put the Saints in the dirt on Sunday and end their season essentially and make sure that they don't get to spoil the Falcons' lovely run that they're on right now. So big game there, obviously eventful time of the calendar, but we've reached the midpoint of the season, and for the first time in recent memory, the Falcons are crushing it. They're 6-3. They have basically been improving every week instead of, I feel like the Arthur Smith trend was kind of start relatively strong and then kind of tread water for till week 8-ish, and then they would just fall off a cliff. Week 8 approximately was when the cliff would just drop out. And this year, instead of doing that, obviously they've continued to climb, and I think that's why people are skeptical. Some people are still skeptical because it's like, oh, isn't this the part where the bottom falls out? And so far that hasn't happened, so that's great to see. Obviously there's a lot of energy in the building with how the offense is performing. The defense had, I think, one of their better performances of the year last week as well. So a lot of energy, a lot of good stuff going on. We're going to dive into all that stuff on tonight's show. Before we get going, I want to bring you guys a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting options, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch and bet on the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NFL to NBA, college basketball starting up, NHL, UFC, MMA, they've got it all. And unfortunately, no more political props. I know there was probably some degens in here that were hitting those until the last minute yesterday. So I hope you won whatever you were doing. But no matter what you want to bet on, you can head to betonline.ag today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. Make sure when you sign up to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to get access to the latest promotions. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. Let's start before we dive into the trade deadline. A quick update on the injury report. They only did a walkthrough today, so it's an approximation. But we did get some good news. It sounds sort of like Drew Dahlman and Troy Anderson are on track to return. Both practiced fully today, which was great to see. There weren't really too many surprises on there. It sounds like Grady Jarrett and Drake London, who I think were kind of the two big question marks, were both estimated to be limited, which that's a nice sign that it's probably not some crazy long absence, hopefully. The only two guys that missed were Bertrand, who is still working through that concussion, so that's becoming a little bit concerning for him, obviously. And then Matthew Judon with an illness, which, it could have been a light illness, given that it was a walkthrough. They're probably just like, all right, don't worry about it. But, we'll see. Joe, I don't know if you were there today, but anything else on this injury report or anything else that you wanted to bring up with regards to these guys?
Yeah, actually, I was supposed to be up there today. I didn't end up getting up there, but I did watch some of the stuff that they posted on the internet. But no, I mean, I think it's generally, these guys are progressing. I shouldn't say like well from like previous. Like Troy Anderson's obviously taken a long time to get him to this point where we thought he would be earlier, but it seems like these guys are kind of getting ready to play this Sunday, which will be a big boost for this team, especially Troy. I think that'll be a topic of conversation we have tonight of getting to see him kind of back in action alongside Caden Ellis, especially after the way that Caden played last week.
Yeah. No, I mean, you hope that this can sort of, like, it seems like he's kind of the linchpin of the defense. Like, we've kind of been, like, thinking that might happen. But, like, it really, like, as soon as he left the field after that Saints game, it's like, oh, wow. Like, it was just really exposed that the Falcons really desperately kind of need him in there right now, especially with how Nate Landman looks, which is just, it looks like he's having trouble moving around out there. So, definitely excited to get him back out there. And Drew Dahlman too, I think Ryan Newsell's done an admirable job, I think, holding the fort there. I think where you see the biggest difference is that Dahlman's one of the elite, run blocking centers in the NFL. And I think that's kind of a key to like why the run game has been a little bit more inefficient and a little bit more inconsistent than it probably should be. So we'll see if that can maybe stabilize things for him. But Tre'Shon, what do you think so far about what we're seeing on this early injury report for Week 10?
Yeah, everything looks good, honestly. Yeah, sounds like Troy's confident, that he's going to be playing this weekend. So, the bye week's in 2 weeks, so obviously you want to be healthy going into it, but it really helps just kind of knowing that that's there as well. So, I don't really have any complaints with the injury report. So I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. And I should add, just most importantly, with some of the guys that left the game, against the Cowboys on Sunday, that it seems like those guys are in relatively good shape. I kind of got that idea from, in the locker room, you could see those guys walking around and didn't seem too concerned, but just good to see that on the injury report as well.
Yeah. When you hear Achilles, Grady Jarrett's out with an Achilles injury, I mean, everyone was probably just like, oh, shit, like so.
And Grady would be the kind of guy who could like tear his Achilles and walk off the field. Like he's one of those kinds of guys. So you never,
like, I'm good. I'm good,
right,
guys. Yeah. No, you put me back in. We're good. And it's like, no, but I do like that they were being cautious with him. You never want to mess around with Achilles stuff, especially if it's like a partial, because if you keep going on it, you don't let it heal, it can become a full real quick. But if you can still preserve your season if you're careful. So, we'll see. It sounds like it's minor, thankfully. And we'll continue to hope for that. And then, AJ Terrell left the game briefly towards the end. He ended up coming back in the game when the Cowboys foolishly reinserted CeeDee Lamb, and we'll see how much time he's going to miss as a result of that. But not really on the injury report, Terrell. So good to see that he's okay as well. Critical part of that secondary. So, we'll monitor more with regards to the Saints as the week goes on too. But obviously that team's kind of reeling still from injuries, and no more Marshawn Lattimore. Who's one of the big pieces in their secondary. I'm sure they're going to give the Falcons everything they got. That this is probably their last hurrah this season. And if the Falcons obviously win this game, they don't really have a path to making the playoffs. So, this is a key game there. And we'll get into that too. But I think this, obviously on paper, there's a reason the Falcons are 3-point road favorites in New Orleans, because New Orleans looks like dog doo-doo. And they just fired their coach. And that usually helps, but it's like, I mean, I don't, you got your special teams coach taking over and shuffling duties. It's like that defense was already having problems with discipline and people doing the wrong things. And it's like, is that realistically going to get any better when you just fired your defensive coordinator, essentially? So, maybe, but who knows? Yeah.
I noticed the Falcons are only 3.5-point favorites in this game, which surprised me. I just felt like they would be more because of the way they've been playing in tandem with the way that, the Saints, obviously, discarding one of their better players in Marshawn Lattimore. So that was interesting to me. To me, it's got to be just in the gambling markets, looking at the Falcons defense, with there being some obvious concern on that side of the ball, potentially. But you would think, I mean, this is a game for the Falcons to just kind of keep things going.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I think it's like, I assume I guess it's up to 4 points now for Atlanta as of right now. But my guess is that they're like factoring in the like rivalry game and that they're always close, and that the Saints are possibly going to get that like bump that like, whatever they call it, right? The fired coach bump, the dead cat
Taysom Hill's
bounce,
back
whatever.
too, so.
Yeah, Taysom Hill's back, and he's clearly the key to their entire offense.
Yeah,
so
at least against
that
the
could be that could be a big thing for them. But yeah, I mean, we'll get to the Saints game in more detail. It's definitely interesting, and it's I think it's actually a critical game for Atlanta for a lot of reasons, not necessarily just that Atlanta's like needs this game. They actually don't really need it per se. It would just be nice if they could get it. I think that's kind of the end, sort of where I'm sitting there. But yeah, let's talk about the trade deadline, because I think that was sort of the most, obviously, all the hype. There was a lot of tweeting yesterday. I think it was all about NFL's trade deadline, clearly. So, and there was a lot of hype about, are the Falcons going to make a move for a pass rusher? They were reported to be in on all these guys. The Falcons kind of downplayed what they were doing, today. I don't think I believe that. I mean, they're not really ever going to say what they were doing unless they got a deal done. But, yeah, I mean, did you hear anything in particular, Joe? I know you've been around the building a lot about any. I mean, I'm sure they didn't just go up and say like, "Oh yeah, here's the list of guys we were targeting."
Right.
But it seemed like they were really looking into, especially pass rush help, but not able to get a deal done, obviously, at when time came.
Yeah, no, I mean, I firmly believe that they were like in the market really trying to figure something out where they could add a piece that is going to help. Because if you hear the way that the coaching staff has been talking about the pass rush and what's wrong with it, it's like guys, like we need guys to win their individual rushes. And if, we got to get guys on the field who can win. And like, to me, that's the kind of talk that you give when you just feel like you need players who can go out there and win those rushes that you can acquire in a trade. And so in tandem with the reporting that we were seeing from multiple, high profile reporters, national reporters, and those reporters would not be putting that out there just because they feel like the Falcons need pass rush. Like they put that stuff out there because they have had conversations where they understand where the Falcons are and in the market trying to negotiate. Ultimately, I kind of tweeted this out. I forget if it was today or yesterday, but like I think you can draw a direct line to the sanctions and taking away that 5th round pick that kind of prevented a move from getting done. I feel like if the Falcons had that 5th round pick, they would have been able to find a value match with a team to be able to, give them what they want and the Falcons get a player. And also it would have been more palatable for the Falcons to be able to give away that pick because, they don't have it currently. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where I understand fans' frustrations of, not getting a player in. I would say, I think there's some conflation that I see where it's like, I see people say, oh, well, the Falcons didn't find it necessary to bring in a pass rusher. And I would say that they didn't find it necessary. Would they have preferred to bring one in? Yes. But I know I'm parsing words here, but like, do you really, really need it? Not technically. And, because anybody that you brought in, you were going to have to trade something away. And there's always just that trade-off. And that's a risk inherently. And so whatever the deals were that were on the table, obviously the Falcons felt like it wasn't in their best interest, probably in the longer term, the medium term, to go ahead and make that risk and try to acquire that player. And ultimately, I think they just decided, hey, let's just try to get more out of Arnold Ebiketie and, Zach Harrison or whoever it might be, that they can get more reps to, or even, guys like Caden Ellis, where it felt like they were, when he was in that mugged up look, they were like coming with him a lot more into the A gaps to just create some, pressure or just like some confusion on that offensive line for the Cowboys. So, yeah, they're going to be kind of betting on themselves from here on out.
Yeah, it seems like it. And it seems like that's the clear conclusion that they came to, that there wasn't really value out there. And yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think I think that the one they wanted was obviously Azeez Ojulari, but
yeah,
the Giants wanted too much for him. I think
right.
They were trying to play hardball, and we're going to see if they, they're going to, I think they were trying to weigh the potential, 2026 comp pick, which like could realistically be like a 5th or a 4th for them, depending on how he finishes out the season and the kind of contract he gets. But, that's 2 years away. So if you could get, a 4th and send a 6th back, obviously they didn't have a 6th, so that makes that more complicated. But like, I think that's kind of what the Falcons would want is like, look, we might be willing to do this 4th, but like we need something back, like, and you know, probably they would be asking for like a sixth, and like they didn't have one, so that probably made it complicated. And you know, it is what it is. But yeah, you know, Tre'Shon, I know you were not really expecting a move last time we talked, so probably tracks with more like what you were expecting.
Yeah, and you know, I think it kind of works too off of like what Joe was just describing. And when you look at how they were talking about it, they're talking about needing their guys to win their one-on-ones because they are scheming up one-on-one opportunities for the edges right now. And there weren't many guys on the market who were winning their one-on-ones at a high rate. Like when we look at the guys that actually did get dealt, you know, a couple of them are still on the lower end in terms of win percentage. Harold Landry, who I started, you know, thinking could be a good fit here just because of how we use our guys. He's somebody that has a very low win percentage as well. And so it goes back to the thinking of you're already strapped without the, you know, future fifth, and you gave up the third for Judon. Do you risk sending a pick for somebody like Arden Key or someone like that? Like, is Arden Key worth missing out on somebody down the road? Because that's another contract you have to pick up. So I don't know if there was really anybody available that fit what they would be looking for, what they thought would be worth it. Because we've talked about Judon. Judon was somebody who's never had a high or really good win percentage. He's somebody that has excelled very well running his stunts and running the sim pressures. And we saw him get his 2 sacks at the beginning of the year that way, but it's not hitting home now, and he's not winning his one-on-ones like they need him to. So it would almost feel like you're kind of making the same bet you did at the beginning of the season, going out and getting another guy who, you know, he doesn't win on his own, but he works when you can kind of use him in this system.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, to me, it's like they probably do need another guy, but like, is it really like moving the needle in a big way? You know, probably not. You know, like Arden Key has been having a good year, and you think that he's probably an upgrade over like Judon or whatever they're getting basically out of that position right now. But it does introduce like other factors to the mix. You know, in that you're probably gonna have to cut someone, and maybe they don't really want to do that, or you know, with Key, the contract was cheap. You know, same thing with Aziz. That was probably why the Giants were asking for a lot for him, is because he's basically less than $1 million at this point for the rest of the season. So that's part of the calculus there. You know, the reason I was like higher on Aziz, you know, and kind of the same thing with Arden Key, is like if they do play well, like you then could decide to re-sign them and make them part of your future plans, or let them walk, and then you get a comp pick back to maybe sort of pay yourself partially back for the rental. But you know, I think that's one thing that Terry Fontenot has kind of been consistent about, right? Is that he has a price that he will pay, and he doesn't go over that. Like, and people, you know, I know there's been consternation about that, particularly with Sweat. You know, a lot of people were like, man, he should have just paid whatever they wanted for Montez Sweat. It's like, he offered them a 2nd round pick. The Bears offered them theirs, which was going to be basically a late 1st rounder versus the Falcons being later. And it's like, the only way to beat that is to like send another pick or send your first. And it's like, you can't, they're not going to send a first for him. I mean, that's just not, that wasn't really on the table. And, you know, it gets dicey because it's hard to know. And, obviously we'd all be happy to have Montez Sweat right now, but, you know, they couldn't get it done. And that's one thing that he if you're going to do something, be consistent about it. And I think Terry's shown that like the Falcons have a price they'll pay for guys, and they don't really overpay. And, you know, I know some people will probably start talking about like, oh, well, they overpaid for Judon. Well, you know, like you can't like evaluate it now and say like, oh, they like, what did you think about it when the trade?
That's the risk.
Yeah.
It's like that's the risk assessment.
Like you have to think about it from a neutral standpoint, which is that you don't know exactly what Judon looks like. All you can do is base it off of previous history. And, you know, I've seen also the line about, well, he was coming off of an injury, so therefore they should have expected him to be bad. It was an upper body injury. This does not explain his lack of explosiveness and that sort of thing. It doesn't have anything to really do with that. Now, maybe you could say like, oh, well, he was, you know, not conditioning while he was rehabbing, and, you know, there might be something to that, but the bicep tear or whatever it was is not going to prevent him from, like, that would not sap his explosiveness. It's not like an ACL tear or like a, you know, anything like that. So, you know, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to stand up for my day 3 picks too. Like the value of these things, which clearly like fans just don't like really value them in a way that they really are valued by general managers, because, you know, you know that you're not getting, some player that you know very well from the college football ranks in those rounds, because those players are getting drafted earlier. But ultimately, like, you do build out the depth of your team by having these guys hit, whether it's like Clark Phillips types or, whoever it might be, JD Bertrands, those types of guys who can develop over a couple of years and then be able to potentially become a starter down the line. You need to draft well in those areas, and you can't just give all of those picks away. You cannot. I feel like in the NFL, you just not a league. It's not a sport really that's designed for you to really just be able to, acquire all the talent that you need through these trades. You have to build for the long term and have quality depth. That's how you build that depth. And so I just think that's kind of the like where fans and general managers are kind of diverging in their opinions when it comes to these trades, because they don't appreciate the value in the same way.
I feel like that goes back to what you said earlier, Joe, in that they don't feel like they need this move right now. So if you make a trade for somebody, like let's say they tried to go after Zadarius Smith, who's older. Well, what if he's not worth or the same player that he is the very next year? You like you're saying, you want to be able to get guys that you could have for a couple of years and be able to build the room around and with. And I think the other thing to like give Terry some credit for, the guys we have named, they play on really good D lines. So like you have to weigh like, okay, Arden Key is playing across from Harold Landry and with Simmons in the middle. Thibodeau's across from Aziz and they've got Lawrence there. So it's like you're also kind of like trying to have to evaluate, the entire situation they're in while simultaneously looking at yours and then balancing the future. And yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And again, it's not to say that they weren't interested in these players. They clearly were. But I just think that ultimately, when they made that risk assessment, it just didn't quite line up. They weren't willing to go to the lengths that the Giants or some of these other teams may have wanted.
Yeah. No, and it's like part of it is that they kind of made their bed with this by like trading picks already for guys, and obviously the tampering cost them a fifth. They traded a third for Judon, and they've kind of backed themselves into a corner now where they just don't have the ammunition to spend. Like they would need to get a return that they thought was worth it, considering they only have 4 picks right now. Like to trade that 4th rounder, which is your 3rd most valuable pick this year, like that, that's a big deal now. Like it's a much bigger deal than if you had a 3rd and you had a 5th too, and all this. It's like, okay, well maybe we can get away from it, but it's like right now they just don't really have a lot to play. They didn't really have much to play around with, so that's kind of the situation they found themselves in. And I think that made them probably more conservative than they would have been if they had a full complement of picks just sitting there.
Yeah, absolutely, totally.
But I mean, I would say like, I know a lot of people are disappointed, and that's fine. But I guess the question is like, what do we think about the decision not to make a move? Do we think it was wise or unwise or whatever? And this is obviously before we have the context of the season to evaluate it. So we probably won't know really if it was wise or unwise, truthfully, until the end of the year. But I mean, I guess to me, I would say like it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with it. But what do you think, Joe?
My gut is that it's the prudent decision. Now, I will just say I'm someone who is risk averse in these kinds of situations in my own general managing when it comes to like a fantasy football deal or like something in a Madden league or something. Like I'm always like I don't love trading in general, so I'll put that out there. But and the other reason is I do think there is more from a guy like AK. Like I feel like you can get more out of him in this second half of the year than what they've gotten so far. I just feel like there's more for some of these guys they already have on the roster who I would just prefer. If you're going to gamble, you're gambling one way or the other. You're either gambling that your current guys are going to be able to up their level of production, or you're gambling that you're going to be able to give away, future assets and a draft pick in order to get that player. And for me, if it's a gamble both ways, I guess I'd just rather gamble and keep some of that long-term security, especially when you're already down. And this Falcons team is just not in the financial position they were a couple years ago. I think some Falcons fans are a little kind of used to having a lot of cash that they're going to be able to splash around in free agency to be able to go out and get, fill any gaps you need. And it's going to be a lot tighter for the Falcons this offseason in that respect. So I'm relatively fine or happy or whatever with the way they went about it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And you feel kind of the same way, Tre'Shon, at this point?
Yeah, I just kind of feel like since the draft, they've kind of just been very clear about what the goal for this season is, and it's just to get back to winning football.
Yeah.
So they're winning games. They're currently winning games with the guys they have. I agree with Joe. I think Ebiketie is really starting to come on, and I keep thinking about how this team looks at development and kind of how they've talked and spoken about it. And against Dallas, we saw like major changes. And like Kevin, you and I talked about how, our AK had the most snaps he's had the entire season. We talked about how we saw Lake really start to mix up and use Ellis in different ways. So, I wonder if that development factor is just going to keep, extending throughout this whole season and to everybody, not just because it kind of seems like that's the approach they are really wanting to take with the entire team. And so maybe we do see them start to really take that next step and kind of unleash some of these guys that, like, Joe was saying, like AK, who I think are going to start needing to get a bigger bulk of the snap at this point because, like, we just don't have other options.
Yeah. No, I think that's the case. I think they do like where this team is. I think they do have faith in the roster's ability to like step up. And, I know a lot of fans don't necessarily share that faith. And I know we had a question from Ed with the £5 donation. Shout out to London showing up tonight. Asking how feasible do we think it is that our current pass rush can actually become respectable with these pieces this season? And I think that's a good question to ask. And, I mean, feasible, like respectable is probably a tall order. I would say like below average is probably what you're aiming for, where you're like hoping to be like the 22nd pass rush instead of like the 32nd. To me, respectable would be like average or better, I guess, but I guess it depends on how you define that. But to me, it's like, I think they could get to 22nd, maybe if stuff broke right for them, if they figured out this interior rotation. I think we got to get more Eddie Goldman, especially in nickel. Just, he's like according to pass rush, PFF grade, which obviously is not the end all be all of anything, but like Eddie Goldman's like pass rush grade is the best of any of the Falcons interior players. And it's not close, like at all. And he's only played, I think, like 68 pass rush snaps or something, but he's the only like positively graded player on the interior as a pass rusher. And it's like, has he played great against the run? Like, no, not like he's been relatively average, but like
as anybody.
but it's like if he's a good pass rusher, like just get the beef out there. And like it's not like that's gonna hurt your run defense in any way, given how everyone else is performing. So, I feel like I don't really see why we're not using him. So I feel like that's an option to potentially improve, and then figuring out what you're gonna do with this edge group. Because, Ebiketie clearly is the guy that we're going to have to lean on. Like, he's the one I think that's actually starting to do something. They seem to really like Damone Harris. He hasn't exactly come through for them yet in a big way, but he's doing some things that are at least interesting. But it seems like one of the secrets is just like they just have to rush Ellis like as much as possible. From anywhere. It doesn't really matter. And that just might be that's kind of how this team lives or dies, is that they're just depending on getting pass rush from Caden Ellis. But yeah, I mean, what do you think they could do something with this group, Joe? Yeah.
I mean, Kevin, I think you framed it well in saying that, like, when you look at like what can the pass rush essentially be from this week through the rest of the season, moving from 32nd to 22nd would be a significant improvement, and that would be like, that would be great. And I think that I would think about it similarly if they were to have brought somebody in. Like, I would be looking for that same kind of jump. Like, I wouldn't expect Azeez Ojulari to take this team to like a top 14, pass rushing team. So it's not like, in my opinion, with this trade deadline, I don't think any player was drastically moving the needle for you as far as what you were going to be. And so, I mean, I think that's the hope, that you can be just more effective essentially than you've been. I've got, I'm not crazy and to think that like this team is going to all of a sudden be gangbusters going from here. But even it's not even just the sacks, it's just like the pressures. If you're just able to make these quarterbacks more uncomfortable, that's going to make a huge difference, because this Falcons team, and not to get too much away from the actual pass rush itself, but like with the problem for me watching this defense is giving up too many easy completions. Like, they're not forcing enough zero yardage plays, forget sacks, just, forcing incompletions, 0 yardage plays, that would be a step in the right direction. It feels like when they've gone up against Baker Mayfield, some of these quarterbacks, they're allowing like 80-something% completion percentages. And that's why it's so torturous to see these teams just going down the field. And it's really hard to stop the teams when they're regularly, that's how they get these 3rd and short situations that they're converting so often. So again, that didn't happen so much in the Cowboys game. Let's hope that can kind of start a trend for this team as they move into the second half of the year.
Yeah. Like one of the things I noticed that we talked about on Tuesday was, D. Alford basically playing something resembling press against CeeDee Lamb, like just kind of being on the line of scrimmage against CeeDee Lamb. Everyone else playing off, but like they just had him go up in the slot on CeeDee Lamb, which had mixed results, obviously, but they didn't really give CD a lot of free stuff. And like just wrinkles like that can help. But yeah, I mean, what do you think about how they could squeeze respectability out of this pass rush, Tre'Shon, over the remaining weeks?
Yeah. Well, I think you had said it at one point, Kevin. I think it's going to really come down to the Caden Ellis usage, and the return of Troy should help maintain that against better opponents. Like I do think there is a little bit of a curve with playing the Cowboys. It's a very obviously dysfunctional group, but they still had to go out there and take care of their job, and they performed better than they had. And a big reason was the increase of Ellis pass rush opportunities. He had the most that he's had this year. And I think when you get Troy back, you can leave him alone, like how they were leaving Nate alone against Dallas. Like you can rely on Troy's sideline to sideline ability. And like, that's really when you just have, that solo linebacker in the middle. That's what you have to have. This is when the speed and like the traits and everything like that like show up and when you need them. So I think with Troy's return, that does help Ellis be able to continue to do this. If he wasn't coming back, you get in a bind, obviously, putting Nate back there when you play the Baker Mayfields and you play the better quarterbacks that can get the ball out even quicker. But I'm kind of with you guys. I think like the 24th would be great because like to get the 22nd, that means you're like performing like almost top 15, like in order to like reverse the average that we got right now.
I was talking just like from this week forward being 22nd.
Oh yeah,
like,
approximately. We'll be lucky to get 20 sacks. They'll be lucky. They'll be lucky to get 20
the season totals are already in the tank.
But to Joe's point, like one of the biggest issues hurting the pass rush is it is a lot harder to rush the QB on 3rd and 2 than it is on 3rd and 7. You're giving these guys 3-step drops, no drops. Like they're able to get the ball out so fast that it doesn't matter if somebody does beat their guy. You don't have a chance as a pass rusher in that scenario. So they have to tighten up. Like there was this statistic that showed that we were giving up 6.6 yards per catch, and that was like the lowest in the league. But it didn't show the issue, which is what Joe pointed out, is that that's coming at like one of the highest completion percentages in the league. So you're basically giving up a first down like with just 2 passes. And that's what we've seen offenses be able to do, is methodically just chip away at this soft zone all year.
Yeah, no, it seems like it. And it seems like the game plan against the Cowboys, at least they felt like they could do a little bit more, play a little bit more aggressive given how shorthanded the Cowboys were in the passing game. I think at this point it's like I think they're kind of understanding that they probably can't play the scheme they were playing for most of the year. Like it's just not going to produce good results. Like they were getting blown out in time of possession even when they were winning games. They just don't really have the pass rush is just not good enough to play like that. Like they can't really force problems. And when you're just giving up free completions, teams will just throw that every time. And they were just marching down the field. So, I think this was kind of a step, like this was kind of a game where you're like, okay, Jimmy Lake is, despite, the rumors about like, we're not changing, I'm not leaving, that sort of stuff. Like I don't look at stats, we need to, whatever what was going on with that. Like, I think they clearly decided to start making some small changes. Obviously they're trying to mix up the rotations. I don't know that like Damone Harris like inside is like exactly what I would have envisioned, but I mean, it wasn't the worst idea in the world. I mean, they're trying. Like clearly, I think there's something there with him. Maybe he could be like a rotational contributor. I mean, he certainly is trying really hard, and I think you could say that's an upgrade over someone else. It doesn't look like it's that great right now. But I mean, it's like, I guess like I know a lot of people are wondering, it's like, well, they're getting like Damone Harris like on the field by any means necessary, and it's like, well, what about Zach Harrison?
Right.
This was the guy that like isn't he the guy that's supposed to be playing inside, that you converted to inside defensive tackle, that you've given him 130 snaps when he was basically your maybe like most promising pass rusher at the end of last season? So it's a little
Am I
odd.
crazier? Am I crazier? Like I feel like Zach has played pretty well in the reps that he's gotten this year, and like I don't get it. I don't get that. Because I vividly remember in that Cowboys game seeing, I was like, oh, who is that defense? Who's that guy playing inside? And because I thought it was Zach at first, but the size didn't look quite right. And I looked at my binoculars and it was Damone Harris. I was like, huh, that's interesting. That's interesting. They would kick him inside and not use a guy like Zach, because you would think that with what they've done with him, with his body type and everything, that would be the situation exactly kind of that you would have him on the field for.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've almost given up like asking for more snaps at this point. It's just so odd to see him on pace to finish with like 100 less snaps than he did as a rookie. And we complained about him not getting enough snaps last year. Last year we were all calling for him to play more. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's like maybe they have some regret. Are they trying to get him working back, lose some weight, get him outside? Like I don't know. Like Joe said, every time I watch film, like nobody's perfect, but he's giving you more good plays than not. It seems like he's earning or would have earned more snaps at this point. And yeah, it just kind of seems like an odd way to go about this whole position switch and everything, which was a really big topic of conversation in the offseason.
And I will say, I talked to Zach. I was kind of one of the first reporters going to pick up on his weight gain, which was, I think I noticed it in one of those offseason camps they have, or the OTAs or whatever. And he said at the time that it was always in the works. Like it was kind of always the plan for him to gain the weight after the first season, because, you kind of trim down and stuff, you get in shape for the combine and all that. And then you go straight into, the season as a rookie. It's such a big deal. So he said that was kind of always the plan to an extent, but I'm sure that, when you have a coaching change and the defensive staff change, that throws a lot of things into flux. And I do wonder what his situation is. I'm going to have to dig into this over the next couple of weeks here. Hard to get real straight answers from people on this kind of stuff. But we'll see what we can get.
Yeah. It's confusing, and it just feels like they're playing literally anyone over him. Like they're working, except for Eddie Goldman. Apparently, Eddie Goldman is like has no snaps anymore. It's like all this man does when he gets on like Eddie Goldman played 2 snaps and had a pressure, and they're like, "Yeah, you're good. Thanks, Eddie. Bye. Thanks for that." So I'll die on that hill. And like I don't want to like dunk on Contavious Street again or anything. Like he came back and had his best game of the year. He had 3 pressures. Okay, that's fine. But it's like they pulled Contavious Street like off the street, essentially. Like he was in street clothes last weekend. Like Rook gets hurt and they're like, oh, we're not going to give Zach Harrison any more reps. We're going to like pull in, Contavious Street off the street and give him all those reps and still give Zach just like 19 reps. Like, they're not really like they're very inconsistent with how they like deploy these interior guys. And like, it just feels to me like they have too many. Like they just have too many guys. And that, like, I mean, I think that was one of the big questions of the draft was like, why the F do we have so many D tackles? And we already saw it with Zion Logue. Like, he gone, like you can't keep him. It's too many. So we, and as everyone predicted, edge is where they needed help. And yet we drafted, 3 defensive tackles when we already had a lot of defensive tackles. And it's like, the ones that you want to see play big roles are barely playing at all. TQ Graham, this is obviously a big year for him. He plays 16 snaps. Goldman, it comes back. He's played 2 snaps in this game and is like actually the 5th highest rated defender on 2 snaps, which that's hilarious, whatever that means. But, and then, it just, It seems like I just don't really understand the thought process there. Obviously, I think it's a little, confusing, but that's kind of the bed they've made. I mean, obviously, I think they're more or less planning to, move on from probably one or multiple of these guys next offseason, which is why the draft played out the way it did. But, it definitely isn't doing them any favors this year when the edge room is clearly in just terrible shape again.
But maybe that speaks a little bit to, why they weren't going to move heaven and earth to try to get that pass rusher, because they do kind of have this understanding that it's more of a longer term process that they're starting here. This is just like year one for this regime. And so, yeah, you do have some of these position groups that are stacked up in odd ways, but they're trying to get these young players prepared to be starters, but they don't want them to have to kind of force to thrust them into these situations. And, no better example of that than Penix as the first pick there. So, I do wonder if these things play into each other.
Yeah. I imagine they do.
The funny thing about Zion is that that's the guy they really need right now. Like they need a big nose tackle like that for this defense. And it's like, I don't know. It's like, this is just one of those things where it's like Georgia player, he would have got a bunch of play time, gets, of course, swiped off the practice squad when no one's looking.
Yeah, they clearly don't want to play a nose tackle. I mean, they got Eddie Goldman. We have Eddie Goldman at home, and it's like they don't even want to use him, So, and it's like, Zion's actually been, not like a crazy great player for the Bills, but he's been giving them snaps, So,
but he's a nose tackle, yeah.
He is technically a nose tackle.
You just got to take up space and not lose ground.
Right. So, it's been interesting to see, like, one thing I'll give credit to this coaching staff for, and we've definitely given a ton of credit to the offensive side for just continuing to tinker and make good changes. The defense, that doesn't feel like they've quite figured it out. To their credit, like, I think they are starting to tinker. I think they really didn't tinker enough, like, until recently. Like, they were kind of just like, we're just going to roll out nickel every snap. It doesn't matter the game situation or the down or the personnel we're going up against. We're playing nickel, goddammit, and you're going to like it. Which, okay, I guess if you had to pick one formation, like one personnel package to play like every down, you probably would pick nickel. That's probably the most versatile, but like, why? First of all, like, you don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to play on hard mode and just only use one, formation. You could use multiple. That is allowed. But like early this season, they started by playing a lot of 3-4 base. Like when they were in base, they were playing five guys in the line of scrimmage, or clearly 3-4 looks with the nose tackle. And they've kind of just gone back to 4-3 almost entirely. Like we barely see any base looks or any, nose tackle looks. And I just like, I don't really understand. It's like, oh, we're going more 3-4 again. No, we're going back to 4-3 again. And it's like, it's not really like changing much on the field. So it's just kind of an interesting situation. But I guess all we can say is they are trying some different things. I mean, they are like, they're trying stuff. It's probably not all going to work or be legitimate, but it's, they're trying some different things, and hopefully they'll find some combination that does work better. But one constant, like one thing I do want to shout out, like Arnold Ebiketie, I think he has started to really become the guy that maybe they can rely on. The one that actually, like, this is like, we were all like, oh, if Arnold Ebiketie hits, then this pass rush is going to be great. We got Judon in here. All we need is for Arnold Ebiketie to come through. We got Grady. We got Onyemata. They were awesome last year. We traded for Matt Judon. If Arnold Ebiketie is legit, this is going to be a good pass rush. And it's like, actually, Arnold Ebiketie is the only one that's legit out of like those four guys. And like, no offense to Grady Jarrett. I know he's coming back from injury and all this stuff. But, Onyemata's been disappointing. And he's played more like an average starter lately, which is nice, compared to what we were getting early. And Jarrett was having a great game before he got hurt. But it's just wild that it's like the one guy that we're like, well, we're not really sure if Arnold Ebiketie can do anything, but if he does, we'll be really happy. And instead it's like, wow, this guy's the only one that's performing like we want.
Raheem had a funny quip about AK today at his press conference. Again, I wasn't there, but I watched it online, and somebody had asked just like, what have you observed? How has he improved since you got here, AK? And Raheem was like, yeah, he's becoming more detail oriented. Like when I got here, he'd be like lining up offside, which is very like, if you know AK's personality, it's like it's like him. He's kind of like a very fun-loving kind of guy, hilarious, just a great personality. But yeah, not the most like detail oriented, I guess. So maybe he is kind of turning a corner there, and just kind of adding that bit of professionalism to his game that will help him get on the field hopefully a little bit more. But I certainly would love to see it. I'm the first one that would love to see him get more snaps.
Yeah. I've always been kind of hard on AK just because he hasn't really lived up to the potential. And for me, what I wanted to see him kind of be able to do this year was be a run defender. And he has done a really good job of being able to take that step this year. I think he's done a much better job at using his length. The guy's a freak athlete. He's got
vines for arms.
Yeah.
He's not tall.
He's got go-go gadget arms. He's really starting to figure out how to use all of his tools. And I think some of that has come from the coaching staff and just him kind of being able to grow. And it's been great to kind of see him, the Kansas City Chiefs game was the first game that really stuck out, where he had 3 hands to the face calls on him that just didn't get called that game. I mean, he was abusing the left tackle most of the night, but just, it's hard to beat the Mahomes whistle, but he was, he's really done good since then. I think maintaining that, he's been really great at causing pressure, and then seeing him get the sack was great. And then he really helped cause the one right after that. He pushed Dak straight up into Grady, and it's just been good to see.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Tre'Shon. I actually didn't expect much of him this year. I kind of just thought he would kind of be similar role and similar kind of production to last year in that kind of designated pass rusher role. But I agree with you. It's gotten to a point where it looks like he has a certain explosion and just a dynamic athleticism on the edge there that can really tangibly help this defense. Especially when you got Judon on one side, who's not the most explosive athlete, helps to have a quick twitch edge player that can get that really good get off and stuff. And just create plays. He's a bit of a wild card kind of player, but the Falcons kind of need one of those players right now, again, to kind of disrupt these offenses.
Yeah. I was a big fan of his coming out of college, and it's he was a good run defender in college, very sound, knew how to set the edge, use that length and stuff like that. It seemed like in the NFL, he just, the uptick in size, because Ebiketie is a very uniquely sized edge rusher, and that he's got the weight, he's got the length, but he's short. He's under 6'2". I think he's 6'1.5", kind of a non-traditional build. But because of the length, it's actually not terrible to be shorter, because usually it helps your leverage.
Yeah.
But it's just it seemed like the size kind of overwhelmed him as a run defender. Obviously, you're getting used to the NFL speed, and it's a lot different than in college, where I think he was just the fastest guy out there at Penn State. It's just Penn State pumps these guys out. So
I remember, I'll never forget, one of the first training camps I saw him in, because my first year covering the Falcons was his rookie year. And so that I hadn't kind of seen this happen before, where you could just tell I remember him going up in some reps against Caleb McGarry, which I thought was actually a great matchup for Ebiketie. But then you could just see that he was just not quite used to the strength and just kind of physicality that these guys have. And they were able to really kind of disrupt a lot of, I think, what his pass rush plan was. And I think it's taken him a little bit of time, maybe more time than a lot of us expected, to kind of adapt to that. But it feels to me like he is kind of getting with it, and can be a much more effective player at this point.
Yeah. I would agree with that. For sure. No, I mean, I think they have a path to improving the pass rush and improving the defense, and they'll need to do it if they want to go far in the playoffs. And that's kind of the conversation we're going to have over the remainder of the season, assuming they stay on their current trajectory. This team is heavily favored to make the playoffs. I believe they have over a 90% chance, according to most metrics, to win the South, just based on the tiebreakers they have, how they performed in the division, and the relative weakness of the NFC South. The Bucs aren't going to roll over and die. We saw that against the Chiefs. They're not going to do that. But the Falcons really just have to take care of business, and the Bucs don't have much chance to catch up. I mean, it's just with the tiebreaker, with the Falcons, if the Bucs lose against the 49ers,
it's a 3-game lead at this point.
It's effectively 3. And then if the Bucs lose next week and the Falcons beat the Saints, it's effectively 4, and there's 7 games left. So it's just, it's not impossible, but we've seen the Falcons, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory many times, but it's very unlikely. So that's why they're so favored. So really, the conversation is, can you become more consistent on defense, where you're able to put away not only the easy teams on the schedule, but take down some of these harder tests that you're going to have to face, which, the Chargers are not a pushover like people thought they might be at the beginning of the year. That team looks legit, particularly on defense, and they have a great run game, which, in case you guys haven't noticed, the Falcons suck at stopping the run. They actually are pretty good on a yards per carry basis, but they do not they just allow big runs way too often. And maybe Troy Anderson helps that, maybe getting my man Eddie Goldman some snaps, hashtag free Eddie Goldman. But, they got those guys. Obviously, the Vikings are way better than people expected. They've shown some cracks, certainly, over the past 3 weeks. And I think they don't look like the juggernaut that a lot of people thought they might be at the time, but they're still a good team.
Yeah.
And even the Broncos, next week, like that game, you can't overlook that. The Broncos defense is legit. You got to go to Denver
On the
one
road.
One of the hardest places to play. Now, the saving grace is the Falcons actually have looked way better on the road for the most part.
True.
Like they've just been better. But that's not an easy game. So, they've got some tests coming up, and I think how the defense plays, because what we've seen so far is that if the offense doesn't play well, the team's going to lose. Like if the offense can't, have a good game, and this was the case against the Seahawks, and Kirk was off and the defense started giving up plays. And then, if Kirk turns the ball over 3 times, you're not winning many games like that. That's not necessarily the defense's fault, but they need the defense to start to get closer to that league average number. And like statistically speaking, they're not that far off from that. But I think, their weakness so far has been the pass rush. They can't generate pressure. And again, like that's the Seahawks, right? Like, if you can put pressure on Geno, you can beat that team and make them look bad. But the Falcons couldn't, and they scored 30 points. So it's like that's just kind of how that team is, and that they're not going to match up against teams like that very well. But focusing on this, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this is not related at all to the we've obviously been talking a lot about the defense and the pass rush, but like I just got to say, it is really fun to watch this team play offensive football. Like I think what Zach Robinson's doing with this offense now is it's just really fun. It's like innovative stuff that they're doing with the motions, the way that Kirk is operating everything. There's like you can see the timing, especially like of the motions and like the way that everything is kind of just connecting pre-snap and then going into their post-snap stuff it's special to watch. And the way that Kirk is dealing to all these guys, I mean, that is kind of if you're going to be poor on one side of the ball, I guess I'd prefer to be poor on defense so that you can watch an entertaining offense. And, they're not letting us down. I think I saw a stat that they're 5th in EPA per play since week 3. So yeah, I know it was off to a rocky start, but man, it's just getting better and better. It feels like for most weeks, except for that Seattle game, I guess.
Yeah. And even then the failures of Seattle felt more about execution than it did about coaching or anything like that. We'd kind of just chalked it up to one of those, classic Kirk Cousins games, the kind you don't like, the kind you maybe worried some people coming here. But to your point, I mean, it feels like the timing, especially for Kirk, is completely night and day from what we saw at the beginning of this season to now. He's hitting so many more of his shots. He had his most efficient game of the year against Dallas. And it just kind of seems like they keep getting better. Like we see how fun it is, and we can still see the areas where it's like, man, they're like one Bijan Robinson like broken tackle away from finally ripping off that 60-yard run.
Yeah, totally. And they're getting more balanced too, especially in these last few weeks. With it feels like Bijan is, it feels like he's been like more explosive, more shifty, just like making more guys miss here in these last few weeks. And whatever's going on with him, the running game has just been in better shape. And it's, Kirk hasn't been throwing for gaudy, air yards these last few weeks, but just so efficient. When you combine that with what they're doing on the ground, it's just, they're starting to feel like one of those top offenses in football right now.
Yeah. They're playing great football on offense, and they're getting better every week. And I think like the return of Drew Dahlman against the Saints, I think that could be like a big thing that helps sort of, because I think the run game, it looks good, and then they'll get like a hold, and you're just like, God, damn it, like what is happening? Like that, we're cruising, and then it's coming back, and and that's gonna happen in the NFL. It happens everywhere, but like. I think that the run game becoming like consistent to where you can lean on it, like they should be able to lean on it, like they leaned on it at times during Arthur Smith's tenure. They haven't really been able to do that. Like, this team should be set up to where they can go up against a team stacking the box in the fourth quarter when they're up by 2 scores, like in the Cowboys game, and get first downs. Like, maybe not string together like 6 of them in a row and just run 12 runs to get to the end zone, but like get a first down and end the game. And, you know, against the Cowboys, they got stonewalled on 2 straight drives, didn't really do a damn thing. So, you know, Joe Schmo brings up a good point. Yes, they need to run more inside. I think they run inside really well, and they need to keep embracing that part of the offense. And again, maybe Drew Dahlman, they're like, we don't exactly trust Newsel as much to do this. And like, no slander to Newsel. Like, he has shown that he's a very good depth center. The offense has not really like fallen off with him. I think the run game has suffered a bit, but he's clearly been a fine pass protector. And that, like, for your backup center, if you can keep like one side of the offense afloat and not like tank the other, that's pretty much all you can ask for from your depth offensive lineman. And I think he's certainly performed admirably. But I do wonder, like, if Drew Dahlman's kind of the missing piece that like really unlocks this offense becoming that dominant run game that I think they could become.
Yeah, you know, they implemented some duo against Dallas, so that was fun to see. We're starting to see a big uptick of the split zone concepts with Warner coming across in motion. So Zach's really growing, and I think that's a part of like his, you know, growth as a coordinator, that he's really going to have to, I think, do a lot more of the legwork and is going to take a bit more time. He's obviously done a really good job implementing the McVay passing concepts and building on them and making them his own. You know, we're in 11 personnel. Like, you know, as much as we love to live in nickel, we love to live in 11. So, you know, on offense, they don't really use a whole lot of players outside of the guys we see, but we've seen this pseudo heavy package with Warner start to come in. And I think they're starting to get better inside running. But to your point, Kevin, I think when you get Dahlman back, that's when we'll really see them probably commit to that even more, because then you can just really start popping that off at a higher rate. Whereas right now, it kind of feels like that's their change up whenever they want to get them off guard from the outside zone.
Yeah. And we've seen teams like the Rams and especially the 49ers lean much more on those power concepts and become a much more diverse run game. And I think it's benefited both teams in a big way. And I think the Falcons are probably going to start moving to that as well. And I'm excited for that. I think that's kind of like the passing game. We're like, okay, like on it. Like, when's the last time we were like, oh, the passing game's good. Yeah, we're fine. We're pretty happy with this. I feel like it's since Matt Ryan was here or like even earlier, you know, so.
It's funny, as someone, you know, I've been in the stadium for a lot of these games just because they've been playing a lot of home games earlier this year. I don't travel for the road games for the radio station for 99, but you know, so I'm in the stadium for a lot of them. And when you're watching it when you're watching the whole field, it's much more like comforting for me to see. I can see the open receiver. Yeah, I can see the targets. When I watch these games on TV, I'm still conditioned to these Falcons quarterbacks the last few years, just, you know, floating one deep over the middle of the field and it just being a terrible throw. And then like there was that one to Darnell Mooney against Tampa Bay where it was just a great route, great throw by Kirk for a touchdown pass. But I was like, oh, I'm fully expecting that to just get, you know, picked off in terrible fashion. But no, you know, that's what makes him a good, solid professional quarterback, Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's like the passing concepts are just night and day better. I mean, it's one thing to like talk about like, man, the spacing, like the route concepts, like there just aren't receivers coming open. Like, yeah, we don't trust Desmond Ridder to find him if they do come open, but they're just like not coming open.
Yeah.
And it's like, now that you see what a functional passing scheme looks like, with like very much a lot of the same pieces. And it's like, oh yeah, it really was Arthur Smith's fault. Like at least like 50%. Like you can't just blame Ridder for this. Like this is, you know, this was not a well schemed offense before, and this is what it looks like with these same pieces. This is what you would expect with the investments you've made, like at receiver, at tight end, at running back. This is what you would expect this to look like, and I'm glad that we're getting that. And honestly, it does feel kind of like 2016, in that this team, like 2016, the team didn't start out super hot. Like it was kind of shaky. They started to kind of get a little bit better. At this point of the season was when the offense was like, wow, this offense is like starting to look pretty good. It was really like from here on out that they started just pooping on teams offensively. And, you know, we'll see if they can pull it off.
I was talking to somebody about this just earlier this week, and we were talking about this exact team, the 2016 team, and it felt like in the back half of that season is when they started to pop off these big explosives, like big explosives for touchdowns, and it feels like that's kind of the missing element, especially like in the run game, obviously with Bijan, like not really breaking off any of those like truly like game-breaking touchdown runs yet, and it's like you can't like expect that or draw those kinds of things up. They just kind of organically happen, and they haven't happened yet. But you do feel like if you are able to get those plays starting, just by happenstance, that's going to help you in so many different areas. Like into the conversation we were having about the defense, like you break off one of those big plays that maybe takes a 7-point lead to a 14-point lead, and then you put a opposing offense into a situation where you're going to have more predictable pass rushing snaps, and so there's just like a whole positive feedback loop that happens if you can start getting those truly like big explosives. I don't know if there's like a term for that, but those like 50+ yard touchdown scoring plays into the offense.
Yeah. You love to see it. Happy to see this offense really taking off, and the explosives in the passing game. It's like target Darnell Mooney. Apparently, it leads the NFL in 20-yard plays, which is crazy to see. Clearly, Terry stays with the great free agent signings. Like, I think we should learn our lesson. Like
scouting,
if they go out and give someone a big contract, like it's like the anti Dimitrov. It's like when Dimitrov signs someone to a big contract, you're like, uh-oh. I don't know about this. I don't know how I feel about this. With Dimitrov, it's just like, I mean, it's hit after hit after hit, man. I mean, obviously not perfect, but like the big signings in particular, like even McGarry, like people were like, man, like, should we really be giving McGarry this contract? But he's like outperformed it to this point. I know you were tweeting about it, Tre'Shon. Like,
man, he's the 16th highest paid right tackle. So like, not even, I'm not even talking about among all tackles, but just by year. 16th highest paid. He hasn't given up he's only given up 3 sacks this year, I think is what it was. No penalties, still elite in the run. I mean, O-line play is horrific across the league right now. That's why the Falcons carry 9 on the 53 and have 2 more on the practice squad, because they like the group they have and they want to maintain it. And I think Caleb's really played himself into the final year of his deal. Obviously, there's a lot of football left, but it feels like it would be really hard to move on from him based on what he's getting paid. And like Kirk looks like I didn't know about the length of Kirk's deal. I was worried about even getting to year 2. I'm like, Kirk looks like he's going to be fine going into next year. So I think you do feel like you maybe want to hold on to him and then maybe draft a guy or do something like that to then have that contingency plan in place. But yeah.
Yeah, I do. It's actually, this came up, I guess it was last draft cycle. I was asking Terry about this because Arthur Smith had mentioned something about like just like the quality of offensive linemen that are coming out of the draft these days is just kind of not the same as it has been maybe, 10 years prior or so. And these guys just need some more development, need some more time building up their bodies and just, getting themselves ready to play against, in the professional game. And so it's a credit to a guy like Matthew Bergeron that he's been able to develop, by changing positions and all that and continuing to get better. And I think that he's been really, really good so far this year. But it helps to have that experienced group that the Falcons have, especially protecting a guy like Kirk Cousins, who obviously doesn't have a lot of mobility. And it's something I've been so impressed with, this offensive line, just like with the snap of the fingers, going from like an offensive style where like everything was play action to now being like second or third in the NFL in neutral pass rate, where they're just like straight up pass protecting and doing a great job of it, which I feel like is got to be kind of tough for an offensive lineman to make that kind of adjustment.
Yeah. I think they've adjusted really well to the new scheme. Look, the job that we keep talking about Zach and all this, but like Raheem put this coaching staff together. And I think that was one of the things that we talked about in like when this was coming together, Joe, this offseason, which was like one of Raheem's greatest strengths was going to be that he has relationships across the league. He can handpick a staff. He's got a deep bench of guys he can call upon if guys get, picked off or, you have to make changes because stuff isn't going the way you want. Like this is like not like Quinn. And Quinn, to his credit, I think is clearly, made more relationships and has a deeper bench now. We're seeing it in Washington. But
Clearly had a good eye.
yeah, he's got a good eye. It's like
Mhm.
in Atlanta, it kind of felt like he just ran out of guys and like probably got pressured to move on from Sarkisian when he shouldn't have. And before they had hired Gary Kubiak, make sure the guy that you're hiring has signed the contract before, or at least has agreed to the interview before you fire your current offensive coordinator and bring back Dirk Cutter. But yeah, we're hopefully we're past those days. But Raheem, I think has got like. This team is clearly bought in to the message Raheem is sending. I like that his takeaway about like, I don't have like, I'm not a big believer in like I'm gonna set the like sort of motif or the belief of this team. Like that's something that has to be forged by every team. It's
Smart.
unique.
Yeah.
And he said right now their motif is that we just find ways to win, and that's what we're gonna keep doing. And that's really what it is. I mean, that's just straight up like this team. They've found some weird ass ways to win football games, and it's not helping our blood pressure. But I mean, what else is new with this team? So at least they're winning them and not blowing them in heartbreaking fashion. So we'll hope that can continue. But Joe, I know we've extended your time a bit, so I appreciate you hanging out with us. Any final takes, guys, before we wrap up tonight? Joe, I'll let you get the first crack here.
No, I'd just say I'm just enjoying watching this football team right now. We talked about the offense. That just makes it enjoyable to watch in general. But looking forward to them to see how they are able to go out on the road these last couple weeks before the bye. I feel like the team is kind of struggling to get to this bye, just physically keeping themselves going. You can see they didn't even do a practice today. Really, it was just kind of a walkthrough. So that's kind of another thing is I think Raheem is actually being really smart with the way he's managing the team and their kind of work levels. I know that maybe some old school people D-Led isn't so appreciative of the of that kind of style, but I actually think it's really smart in the modern game. But it'll be interesting to see just kind of what kind of levels they're able to bring to these last couple of games before they get to that bye and can recharge.
Yeah, no, me too. I'm interested to see. I think it's a good call. I think this is going to be an emotional game. Like you're probably not making a ton of adjustments. You played this team once already. It's funny because the Saints like got drastically different like in the interim, and then now they're kind of just back to looking like they were when you played them last. So it's like actually we probably just we're gonna run the same game plan except we're gonna tackle Taysom Hill this time. But I'm interested to see how they handle it. But yeah, I mean I think today it's I think it's okay to give your guys some rest, especially when you're 6-3. Because the physical and mental side of the game is a big part of it. It's not just like smash as many practice reps as you can into every week. It's not
when you have a quarterback that you have a lot of confidence in, that you feel like he can prepare himself well enough with by doing this kind of stuff, where I feel like previous staff with an inexperienced quarterback may have felt like they needed to get as many reps as possible in during the week to get him ready. So yeah, it all kind of feeds into one another.
Yeah. No, I'm excited to see it. Tre'Shon, anything else you want to add before we sign off tonight?
Yeah, I think like when we just kind of take a step back and realize, we're 6-3, 4-0 going for 5-0 in the division. It's kind of like, you guys have been saying that it's just nice to be able to enjoy Falcons football in November. We're usually starting to crack through draft prospects right now. So it's been really good. And I think that, we did see the defense take a really positive step forward this last week. And a lot of credit to Jimmy Lake, who did, call himself out, I felt like, before the Cowboys game that week. And he said that he was going to make changes and that he was going to do things differently in that Cowboys game. And I think he really delivered. You pointed it out earlier, Kevin. I think the move to give Alfred more man looks was really smart. He's a much better man coverage corner. We've seen him struggle a bit in zone this year. We saw him just live with Landman in coverage and letting Caden rush more. So it's a really good feeling to just kind of see this team, focusing on getting better and improving by the week and setting themselves up really well before they head into this bye after these next two.
Yeah, no, agree with you there. It's nice to see this team. I don't think they're resting on their laurels. I don't think it's anything like that. I think these guys are approaching this the right way, and we'll just hope it can continue. I think that's the key thing here. Can they keep this going? And that's what we're going to see over the next week. This is obviously a big game against the Saints. We're going to have a full game preview for you guys coming out Friday, breaking down this game in detail, the matchups, how the Saints are looking as we head into the rematch. But yeah, we had one final comment from Noah C with the $5. Thanks. Noah said, went to the Benz for the first time for the game against Dallas. Hell yeah, Noah. It's such a great experience. The stadium is insane. We still need to work on closing out games, comfortably. Yeah, I agree with that. My liver and my heart could,
frustrating to watch that.
Yeah, that Cooper. Now it's like, Cooper Rush has a better record than Dak over the last bit, but Cooper Rush actually not like a bad backup quarterback, clearly, but I still don't appreciate that last drive. If we could cut that out, that would be fantastic. But thank you, Noah. Appreciate you, man. Shout out to Noah for all of his moderation work. He's working on the Discord and here as well, keeping the bots at bay. So thanks, Noah. But yeah, guys, thanks so much for joining us here on the Falcoholic Live. We will be back, like I said, for the game preview on Friday. Please like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Leave us that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. That really helps us grow and all that good stuff. Leave your comments if you got those. We'd love to see them. Please do check out thefalcoholic.com for that terrific written content. Patreon.com/Falcoholic Live or the YouTube channel memberships if you want to support the show. Again, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We will see you next time here